All right, good luck, everybody. You'll have to bear with me. As you see, my knee pain is worse even, so I'm have to sit down. And I'll try to, adjust for that. Welcome to our new time slot. As you know, obviously, the time has changed, so hopefully from here on in, it's 8 o'clock. I imagine it's on here, but, I know not everybody sees it. And we'll hope to stick with it. Let me just say before I proceed that I will be away 2 or 3 times this winter, for scholar and resident stuff and things like that. So stay tuned to like the next Where, When, and When is coming out, and they'll have the changes in the schedule, That's the plan so far. I know right off the top of my head I got February 4 and February 10 or something like that, or whatever. So we'll play it as we go along. But we're here today and next time, and that's good. And let me start as I always do. It's hard for me to have a presence of mind because I'm actually in a lot of pain. But I want to thank Shomer and Moon, as we always do, for sponsoring, for being the host. I want to thank they deserve it, and I want to thank the Lehman family for being sponsors of the series. As you see, a different Lehman is sponsoring tonight. That's Harold Lehman and family, and Molly and everybody, and Gil and so forth, in memory of Rivka Lehman, who was a very well-known person in the community and was a big member of my shul, right, and one of the great music experts, Tel Aviv Conservatory. Right. And we do miss her. So thanks for that. The Israel trip is still on. And we have people are joining, I'm happy to say. And it's all kind of moving back and forth. It's an art form to constantly readjust the itinerary, but because sometimes you can get meetings with VIPs and things like this. So I hope it'll be very exciting. I think that kind of covers it. I want to thank, we might even be doing the North this time. I wasn't expecting to, because it depends on when the Army sets up the base for the Nachal Haredi. And what else? I want to thank the tech team, and without any further ado, we'll get underway. Because I have to go on a plane tomorrow morning, very early in the morning. So tonight is the name of the series, for the purpose of the record, of course, is the the Oslo Immigration Assassination, the State of Israel and the Jewish People, 1992 to 1996. That was the day before yesterday. Tonight we're doing lecture number 4, which is called The Fellow Next Door, the Peace Agreement with Jordan. And therein lies the tale. So let me begin my remarks by pointing out that, you can look at Israel historically, you can look at Israel meta-historically. Historically, we do over here, you try to find the human causation, the political back and forth and all the rest of it, which is the stuff of history. Meta-historically, you can sometimes see, at least it seems to me over here, you can see like the hand of providence, you understand? And as Rav Hutner used to say very famously, most of the time the Rebbeinu Shalom runs the world, right? Sof kol sof, okay? And the reason I say it is because that means most of the time the good Lord runs the world. Now, the reason I say it is because providence so arranged matters that the state of Israel's longest and most delicate border ever since 1948 has been with Jordan, okay? And Jordan has always been militarily weaker than Israel, and still is. So that's like unbelievable chesed. I'm not saying it's perfect, but imagine if Israel was next door to Iraq. Imagine if Israel was next door to Iran or something like that. We take this for granted. That's what I'm trying to point out to you, okay? Now, moreover, and maybe you don't know that Jordan is militarily weaker, but that's what it is. Moreover, Jordan has always been a potential volcano in terms of its domestic politics, which means the regimes in Jordan, their problem has never really been Israel. The problem is internal. King Hussein, King Abdullah, the rest of it, are well aware that the real threat to them is not coming from the Jewish state across the border. Now, that doesn't mean they like him, it doesn't mean they don't hate them, and so on and so forth. But pressing matters are pressing matters, and what they really got to keep in mind, ever since 1948, is that they shouldn't be overthrown by an internal regime. And the truth of the matter is, if you asked observers in 1948, in those years, is Jordan going to last? They all say no. You can see in the New York Times and Time Magazine, all the others, they say, oh, sooner or later going to be overthrown. And many other countries and regimes have been overthrown. For example, Syria, for example, Egypt, for example, Iraq, and so forth. For example, Iran with the Khomeini revolution and others. So it's kind of, Lebanon has been unbelievably unstable, as I think everybody knows. They had the Lebanese civil war. It's still not over, the Hezbollah and all the rest of it. Jordan has been, if you're talking about having the same government all the way through, it's kind of funny. Now again, this has been a plus for Israel. You get it? They didn't do it because it's good for Israel, but if you want to look at it objectively speaking, that's what I mean when I say you see divine providence. As a matter of fact, Adrabah, Israel has always regarded the Hashemite monarchy, now King Abdullah, before that King Hussein, as the best possible option for a government in Jordan, better than all the alternatives. What's better? What the PLO should take over? The Muslim Brotherhood should take over? Some other group should take over? The Hamas should take over? All of them are potentials, you understand? The communists should take over? Let's put it this way. I'll use American terms. You look at your next door neighbor, you say like this, it could be worse. Now maybe that's not the case in your case, but it could be worse. You see? So that's, in Israel's case, the way it's been set up with their longest border, especially before the 67 war, when the border was unbelievably long and treacherous, to have the government in Jordan, which is, as I said before, a lot weaker and all the rest of it, had been a plus of gigantic proportions for Israel. For its part, the kings of Jordan have always known that Israel is not out to topple their throne. And I'll talk about it a little bit later on. In fact, the Mossad, many times saved the life of King Hussein. And he actually wrote a book. I remember reading this, in Forest Park, in the public library in Forest Park. That's in the 60s, okay? Just before I was born. And what do you call it? So I used to, I was a weirdo. So, you had Middle East biographies. This autobiography on Easy Lies Head Wears a Crown. He said over there himself. He said, there was a time they were going to do this, and the CIA told me about it. There was a time going to do that, and the Mossad warned me about it. The best one is, with the nose drops. Somebody figured out how to put acid in the nose drops because they needed nose drops. You understand? Imagine, go like that, goodbye, Charlie. And Israel told me, don't use the nose drops. They didn't believe it. Israel said, put it in the sink. Right through the sink. You get it? So, and it was Israel that did it. So, I remember he writes in the book that he was flying a plane somewhere because he was a pilot, among other things. Airplane pilot and a helicopter pilot. And he liked fast cars and all that business. And the Syrians sent up 6 jets to shoot him down. It was the Israeli Air Force that sent a bunch of jets to save him. I'm talking about in the early 60s. So, in other words, he knew what's what, and that's why you see the picture over here, that he used to, when he had later secret meetings in Israel, he used to fly by himself in a plane or a helicopter unarmed, because he said, what do I need a bodyguard for? He's safer in Israel than in Jordan. Well, they're not, let me put it this way, if he's going to negotiate a case with Golda Meir or something like that, Israel's not to hurt him, right? Matter of fact, when he landed the plane in some secret airfield, the Mossad, all these guys were there to guard him. You understand? So it's been a very strange relationship. However, there is another side to this. Jordan is probably where Israel is resented and hated the most. And I think with the most reason. To understand this, one has to go back to the history of the two countries, united by geographical contiguity, but divided by directly competing religions and nationalisms. As everybody knows, Jordan is 100 years old, that's all. Okay? Really, this should be, I can't turn around, but I think you know this more or less. That's Abdullah. This is Faisal. These are the two guys that worked with England in the First World War with Lawrence of Arabia. By the way, that's Lawrence of Arabia. Okay? So, and this is the father, Sharif Hussein. So in other words, these guys joined with England in the First World War against Turkey. They want to overthrow the Turks. The deal was that they would be the kings of Saudi Arabia. The old guy, Sharif Hussein, he was going to be like the king of Saudi Arabia, and these would be his sons. And he was a very tremendous yichus. He comes from Mohammed, and he wanted to put in Sharia law. No, let's put it this way. The Turks had abolished slavery. He says, no, it's against the law. want to bring back slavery, you get it? And he was in Mecca and so forth and so on. So this was the plan. You will help England defeat Turkey, and you'll become the kings and rulers of this Arab state. It was a machlokas over the borders, be a king of the Arab state. It really started with the seizure of power by the Young Turks in 1908, which led to the Arab Revolt of 1916, which means that it used to be all under the Ottoman Turkish Empire. But the Ottoman Turkish Empire used to be run by these sultans, which were very religious. And in that case, the regime gave a lot of respect and power to local officials. So if Sharif Hussein was the main macher in Mecca, so he was treated very nicely. But in 1908, there was a revolt, a revolution in Turkey, and was replaced more or less by you and I would call a secular government. And they started saying, no, you got to be Turkish, not just Muslim, and try to shove it down their throats, and the Arabs resented and revolted against it in 1916. But the British were not able to make this happen. They couldn't keep their promise because, as we know, another Arab leader took over Saudi Arabia and wiped out the supporters of the Hashemite dynasty. So Sharif Hussein could not become the king, his sons could not become the princes, and Gamarno. Instead it became not Hashemite Arabia, but Saudi Arabia. Get it? That's why I call it Saudi Arabia. Because Ibn Saud, he's the one who took over. Now, so the British, in order to make up for this, they created two countries for the two Hashemite princes to be kings of. And that, of course, is Iraq and Jordan. So now, and here's the conference. That's Abdullah. Can't see too far away. In other words, in politics, the most important rule is reward your friends and punish your enemies. Otherwise, why do you want to be my friend? So these guys have been friends of England. If they were left high and dry, the message would go out to all the Arabs. You can work for England, and they can't deliver. And so for pure hard politics reasons, they said, listen, we're taking over all this territory of the Turkish Empire anyway. What the heck? Let's create a country called Iraq, which never existed before, and give it to Faisal so he can be the king there. So at least you'll see, if you don't get totally what you want, but you got, as they call it, Khaticha Ruli Iskabe, you got a nice piece of territory to be king of, and do the same thing with the other guy, Prince Abdullah, who was his brother, and we create a country called Jordan. In other words, they just created it out of nowhere. Now, it kind of boggles the mind, because it's talking about creating countries for reasons that have to do totally with British politics and things like this, right? And how can you, well, let me put it this way. You see this, you don't see this so much in Jordan, but you see this very much in Iraq. Iraq, as we all know, has been unbelievably unstable, and certainly since George Bush I and George Bush II, place has gone up in smoke, which is okay, and it's still up in smoke. And it's because you got the Sunnis, the Shias, the this, that, and the other, which the United States discovered when the army went in there beforehand, the Kurds and so forth. Who put them all together? And the answer, well, the British did. Why did the British put it together? Notice, why did they make it, you and I who hate each other, have to live in the same room? You understand? Forever. Forever. That's what they did. But you see, that's imperialism. If you rule all these territories, you can give some out as Hanukkah presents. You understand? That's the idea of great empires. That's what you do. You reward your friends. Now, to tell you the truth, we shouldn't be laughing at this. That's how they gave us Israel, for better or worse. They conquered the Turkish Empire, and they said, something, Balfour Declaration. We'll give Israel to the Jews. There weren't any Jews, or hardly any Jews there at that time, for all kind of reasons that we've discussed in the past. Balfour and Lloyd George and so forth decided to do it. And so there's no skin off their nose. That's why the Arabs are angry about it today. As a matter of fact, I just happened to see on the news, maybe you did, that 2 or 3 British girls, leftists, 20-year-old something, went and they splashed ink in the Parliament building on the statue of Balfour, saying that, it's all his fault. Which from their point of view, I get it. Now, they were British, but I understand what they're saying. Now, to tell you the truth, this had already happened before the First World War. England had offered Uganda to Theodore Herzl, who mamish didn't represent anybody. Now, that means they took a piece of the earth. Uganda really means Kenya, but it doesn't matter. He says they took a piece of the earth called West Africa, and it was Joseph Chamberlain, the father of Neville Chamberlain, who was the colonial ministry, a very important figure in British political history, if you go back 120 years, very important. And he said to Herzl, he said, listen, I like to help the Jews. I got Jews in my constituency. Let me see what we got. And then Herzl said in the diary, he pulled out, well, this is taken. Here's something that might work for you. You know what I'm saying? So basically like you're going to buy a pair of shoes, and the British could do it. And remember, it was the Zionists that turned it down. They could have taken it. I'm not saying they should, but I'm saying they could have taken it. So it boggles the mind that when you have this kind of imperialism, you can play all kind of games with this stuff, but that is the name of the game, okay? Now, by the way, it was a good thing that it was the British that ruled such vast territories and could give this out. If it had been the French are anti-Semitic so-and-sos. Here, they just, look at this, they just made a new movie about Dreyfus, okay? This is exactly from the same period when England was offering them Uganda. This was happening in France. Now, in World War I, the French and British divided the Middle East. For the same luck of the dice, it could have been the British take Syria and the French take Palestine. You think they would give anything to the Jews? You understand? And by the way, they knew Dreyfus was innocent. They just fed the heck with it. You understand? So I'm just telling you, the Rebbe runs the world. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, as we know, when you create countries or give away land, someone gains and someone loses. In this case, the winner was Prince Abdullah, the brother of Faisal. Okay? That's who he was. So this is a guy who was born in Mecca, was educated in Istanbul, was a member of the Turkish parliament. I mean, he was what we would call today a sophisticated person. But he was an Arab prince and a grandson of Mohammed. Now, if he's the winner, because he got a brand new country, who's the loser? The answer, of course, is the Jewish people. Okay? And this was a gigantic thing 100 years ago. Today's 2022. If you went to 1922, this is what tore the Jewish world apart, especially the Zionist movement, because half the Zionists said, this is ours, and the other guy said, listen, don't fight with England. They gave us something, we're lucky even to get that. So, just shut up and do a half a loaf. This was the huge reason for the split with Jabotinsky and Weizmann. That's what Jabotinsky was. Let's go to the next one. Here's your cast of characters. There's Jabotinsky, there's Chaim Weizmann, and here's Churchill with Prince Abdullah giving him a brand new country. And Weizmann said, all right, so we'll have a state in this side. And Jabotinsky said, Shtegador Yarden, right? The whole thing is ours, they promised it to us, and what gives them the right to pull it back? And this is the beginning of what they call revisionist Zionism. It means they want to revise and get that back. Okay? This was a huge machlokas. And as you can see, if you look at the anthem of Beitar, Shtegadol, both sides of Jordan belong to us. They still sing that. They don't mean it anymore, but we got enough trouble with this. But, but these were the fights 100 years ago. Okay? These are the fights 100 years ago. But what happened Lamaisa was that the great majority sided with Chaim Weizmann. Jabotinsky was more or less expelled from Zionism and was boycotted by the establishment, which made peace with the idea of an Arab Transjordan. And therefore, whenever Jabotinsky went anywhere, he was usually boycotted or not allowed in. In Baltimore, Maryland, he came here in 1931. They had a brand new rabbi in the Shar Zion down on Park Circle named Rabbi Tabak, if people are old enough to remember. And he said, I guess, he can speak in my shul. Do you know all the German Jews, the Associated Jewish Charities, they all picketed the shul, like it would be today. I don't know if one of these guys came over there. And Tabak guy, but he didn't care, Now, from then on, in mainstream Zionism, the focus was on a Jewish state in Palestine, in Palestine, which was no longer defined as both sides of the Jordan, but rather what we call Cisjordan. There's Transjordan, that's the other side, and Cisjordan, our side of the Jordan. And ever since then, there's been a fight over who gets this, as you all know. As you can see over here, there was a plan, as we all talked about, that there could have been a Jewish state in this part in 1937-38, the Peel Commission. Forget this, right? There was already, this, right? Now, I'm going to make a point. When the British proposed this, so there was a big split in the Arab opinion. You might say like this: the Palestinians, led by the Mufti on the one hand, and the Jordanians, led by Abdullah on the other. Listen to this. The Palestinians, led by the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, said, no way, no Jewish state even in 1 inch. Abdullah, the Emir of Jordan, said, I'll take it. In other words, I'll be the ruler of my country plus all of this, and the Jews can have their state. So in other words, if he would have had the one who would have had the Daya, and if the Jews would have voted strongly to take it, you might have had a Jewish state very small. You would have had a Jewish state before Hitler started World War II. That's my point. You understand? And you'll tell me you can't fit 6 million people into there? Get stuck in it. That's better than Auschwitz. You understand? Now, you couldn't have saved 6 million, but you could save 2 million, 3 million for sure. You understand? They have somewhere to go. You wouldn't have the homeless Jews that we all know about. So it was a road not taken, as we all know. After all, like I said, for Abdullah, he was very pragmatic. He said, that leaves me with a big chunk, right? 5/6 of Palestine, I imagine. But that was not the road not taken. More importantly, it showed that Emir Abdullah didn't really give a darn for Arab public opinion. Because when the British proposed this, you can imagine all Arabs said, this is a terrible idea. And they all followed, I would say, the hard-line position of the Mufti and so forth, and don't take it, and this and that and the other. And Abdullah says, I think you should take it. So notice, if he would have been the one who had the dominant voice in Arab politics in Palestine, he had a powerful voice. But if he would have had the dominant voice in Arab Palestine, you might have had a Jewish state at that particular time. I mean, you have to understand this. And in point of actual fact, if you know what they call the Intifada of the 1930s, which in the late 30s, the Palestinian Arabs rose up and attacked the British and attacked the Jews, made a huge terrorism campaign. It was a war was raging. The British had to send in 50,000 soldiers to crush the Palestinian Arab revolt. It was partially a revolt of the Palestinians against the British and the Jews. It was also very much a civil war between two factions of Palestinians. It was like the mafia. Team A shot Team B and vice versa. And it was those who said, let's back Abdullah and take this deal, versus the ones who said, no way. And, there was a lot of violence, inter-Arab violence, during those years. And it reflects this funny situation of the Jordanian regime vis-a-vis Palestine. Now, the Jews knew this, the Zionists, and from their point of view, if the Mufti would have died, let's say, for example, World War II, let's say a bomb would have fallen in Berlin, and the Mufti would have died, because he ran away and joined Hitler. I think everybody knows that. Abdullah then would have been the dominant personality among the Arabs on the Palestinian side, and I don't know, they might have made a deal for partition. Notice when the United Nations passed this in 1947, what's his name? Abdullah, you know this, right? This is the United Nations partition plan of November 1947. So who gets all this? Is the Jewish part, and this is the Arab part. Who gets that? See, he said like this, I'll be the king of the whole business. I'm Arab, I'm as Palestinian as anybody else. That's a good deal. Let the Jews have the other piece. You understand what I'm saying? And then there could have been a state of Israel without any fighting. Now, I don't know what the result of all that would have been. That's a real, what do they call those, counterfactuals. But nevertheless, this is the basic dynamics that was going on over here. Because of all this, the Jews in 1947 who were pushing for a partition of Cisjordan, correct? When you get to the United Nations partition, it wasn't, the 50% of the whole Palestine, 50% of this side of the Jordan River, okay? So that was the best they could hope for. That's the reason why Golda Meir and these others met secretly with Abdullah, who by that time was a king, with the idea that he would take over the Arab part, his army. He would crush the Muftitites, the rejectionists. At the same time, he would recognize the new Jewish state, and a state of Israel would have been born in peace. Let's go to the next one. Those are our next one. Yeah, if only. By the way, go back one. Look at this. There's the Grand Mufti visiting Auschwitz. Isn't that something? They'll tell you they didn't know anything. You get it? That's him visiting Auschwitz. Make sure they do a good job. Let's go to the next one. Yeah. Anybody knows anything about Golda Meir knows she had secret meetings with the Arab king just before the state of Israel started. And it's part of her mystique. And why was she doing that? Because the Jews said like this, you're different than these guys. Adrabah, you take over, you crush all the guys that are making trouble, you'll have a big piece of land. The Jews are so desperate, they did not have confidence in late 47 that they'll be able to resist the Arab invasion. Now you know and I know in the end they did and they actually conquered it, but I'm talking about the way they thought. This is Ben Gurion, Moshe Sharet, Golda Meir, and they said, we can cut a deal, and this guy's somebody they thought they can cut a deal with. And so they figured Abdullah would be glad to suppress the Mufti, because they hate each other, this is a good deal. And the British government knew about it. Let's go to the next one. And the Prime Minister Attlee and Bevan, they were in favor of this. You get it? No, that's the way they thought that the partition of Palestine would turn out to be. There would be Israel, and not a state called Palestine, be Israel and Jordan. Because the British realized also, Jordan really is on like Palestinian territory. That is to say, the land that was, after the First World War assigned to Palestine. But as I think we all know, it didn't work out. The Palestinians were stirred up in 1947, 48 by the Mufti, and his guys started shooting literally the minute the United Nations voted for partition. I think many know this. By the way, it's late November. Right now we're in late November. Today's November 19. It's another week or two. It's November 29, 10 days. That's when they had the United Nations vote. On November 30th, the Arabs went crazy and ran down Rehov Yafo, that we all know, and killed everybody in Yerushalayim. And the Arabs next door, at that time, Yafo was all Arab city. And it's adjacent to Tel Aviv, as we know today. And they immediately start shooting into Tel Aviv. And across the rest of the country also. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what happened. So the notion that there'll be some kind of deal, with Abdullah didn't exactly turn out so great. And as a result, the Palestinians who live in the Palestine side, or on the Cisjordan side, more or less went along with those who said, let's kill all the Jews and let's get involved in a fight. I think we remember this, or you've seen it in the movies. They shot the cars driving on the roads. They couldn't go from place to place and all that stuff. So that means that as a player in Palestinian politics, Abdullah was like emasculated. You understand? And that's why you see between November 30 and the establishment of the State of Israel, there was fights going on all over here. Abdullah was standing over here with his army saying, I can't wait till it's legal, and then I'm moving with my army and take over the whole thing, meaning the Arab part, okay? But meanwhile, the Jews are fighting for their life, as you know. The question was, what would actually happen on May 15th when the British pulled out? This was, again, the subject of the famous Golda Meir Abdullah meetings. And she said, listen, she was speaking on behalf of the Jews, of the Sachnut, the Jewish agency. And she basically said, look, occupy the Arab part, don't attack the Jewish part. Get it? Now, it boggles the mind the way Ben Gurion and these guys were thinking. You take Yaffo, but leave Tel Aviv alone. But that's what she said, okay? But Abdullah, by this time, since all the fighting had already started, he said, I can't promise anymore. I'll tell you what, because since the fighting is there, stuff is happening, and I'm going to be pulled into this. So I got a great idea. Why don't you all surrender to me? And when it comes May 15th, 1948, you become part of Jordan, and I will take care of you. And by the way, I think he meant that he was not a barbaric guy. Him and the Mufti, very different types. He said, you'll be all part of Jordan. I'll give you all the Jewish rights you want, this and that and the other. And then Shalom al Yisrael, as they say. Here were a lot of misunderstandings, obviously, because, let's put it this way, that's a broad statement. There's no way the Jews are going to do that. And second of all, even according to his thinking about it, you're going to take over the Arab part of Palestine. What about Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim at that time had 100,000 Jews and 60,000 Arabs. So how exactly are you going to work that out? You get it? Now Abdullah said, oh, don't worry about it, we'll work it out. Of course, he meant he'll take it over. The most important, so this is, I'm not going to go into all the nitty gritty. I'm just trying to show you that Israel and Jordan have a long past. The most important thing to emphasize is that Abdullah could not ignore popular opinion, what they call the Arab Street, across the Middle East, and he could not join in, I'll say it again, he couldn't refrain from joining in the invasion of Palestine on May 15th, 1948. So when the British pulled out, the Egyptians invaded, the Iraqis invaded, the Syrians invaded, the Lebanese invaded, and the Jordanians, okay? He couldn't do that. So his promises had to be understood within that light. So what you see over here is his promise is not really a promise. And this is the problem. Keep this in mind as we talk about making peace even today with the Arabs. Promise is not really a promise. Promise means as long as I can't get stronger to you or get an advantage over you, I'll keep it. But the minute it's over, it's transactional, you understand? The minute things change, I'm going to change. So is that an agreement? Now, we are Westerners. We come from the United States. You know, when there's a treaty, there's a treaty. The United States does not invade Canada. You see, you know, what's legal is legal, what's not legal. This is a different part of the world. Their idea what's legal is legal, and treaties, all the rest of it, is more transactional. Now, without going through the whole 1948 war, suffice it to say that on Saturday, May 15th, 1948, Abdullah sent the Jordanian army across the Jordan River into Palestine with unclear goals, but certainly to capture Yerushalayim. That goes without saying, because that's the holy city, right? And take over the Arab part of Palestine, of the partition. And along the way, of course, we know, that's how they got involved in the Gush Etzion fight, because, as you know, they wiped out the Gush Etzion. Isn't that right? Now, notice over here, I don't think I even have to show you, because many people have been in Israel and they go visit places in the Gush. Now, you know, the yeshiva, all the rest of it. It's right near Jerusalem. Where is it? Where is it? There's Efrat, for example, you know. I mean, it's right nearby. So in other words, the Jordanian army is crossing in to go to Jerusalem, and along the way is this, and so they had to take it over and basically wipe it out. Now, I left out an important part. The Mufti and his guys, known as the Palestinians, they never agreed to Abdullah taking over anything. They want to have their own state. They simply attacked the Jews on November 30th, 1947, and afterwards, hoping to drive them into the sea. We know who the Mufti was, Hashemite al-Husseini, and we know what his goal was, and and he never denied it. Okay, so they're going to wipe out the Jews. So they're facing two enemies: the Palestinians, one hand, excuse me, and the Jordanians. Okay. It turned out, and here's where Rav Hutner comes in, that the Palestinians proved in 1947-48 to be militarily incompetent. So when Israel went on the defensive in April and May of 48, just before the state was proclaimed, the Jews busted them. That's the story of Israel. That's when they took over and wiped out Yaffo and Haifa and Sfat and this place and all over the place. Knows Once, let's put it this way. Let's say, for example, for argument's sake, the Arab countries would not have invaded on May 15, 1948. The Haganah would have taken the whole country because they were better organized. They actually had more men. By that time, they were getting weapons, and the Palestinians were not competent. You understand? So I'm talking about in real military terms, offensives and all that kind of stuff. So let's put it this way: the Jews would have taken over the whole country, and the local Palestinians could not help noticing that. So meanwhile, they hear people saying, we're going to drive the Jews into the sea, we're going to wipe them out, kill, kill, kill. And meanwhile, the Jews are taking over all this stuff, you see? So to make a long story short, it was the small army of Abdullah that saved the Palestinians. What they used to call the Arab Legion, which when I was young, they used to build up in big terms and all the rest of it, because it was organized by the British. How big was the Arab Legion? The answer is 8,000 men. Okay? People don't know that. So the whole Israel had close to 100,000 men at that time, 90,000. Said 8,000 men, and they're supposed to hold the whole West Bank, you see? Or to be more exact, the southern half of the West Bank, because the northern half was the Iraqi army. You see? So what I'm trying to say is, if Ben-Gurion hadn't had a great deal of bullheaded stupidity, I'll say it again, if Ben-Gurion was not characterized in 48 by a certain bullheaded stupidity, Israel should have easily beaten the Jordanian army because it was much smaller. But it didn't happen because he insisted on attacking Latrun and attacking this place, all these places where they were well entrenched, and they didn't organize their attacks well, and this and that and the other. And to make a long story short, Israel screwed it up. That is a well-known thing. It used to be there was usher to say this in the old Israel before 67, and they would ban the books that said this, but that's what happened, okay? Because I'll say it again, the whole doggone Jordan army was the size of a what? Brigade, a division, So to hold that whole long line, right? Now, this is how Abdullah took over the West Bank, and especially the Al-Quds, as they call it, the East Jerusalem, with the Kotel. Now, again, I'm speaking in terms of Providence, off and on tonight. In my personal opinion, this spared Israel the wrath of the Islamic world, which could have crushed them in the early years of the country, because they still held the Harbais and all the Arab stuff. You get it? So notice, from the point of view of the Muslims all over the place, it's bad that they chased out the Palestinians, but at least the holy places are still in the right hands. Hebron, East Yerushalayim, Harbais, and such places, you see? By 67 it was a different world. Now, to the Palestinians, Abdullah may not have been a Lechatchila, but he definitely was a B'diavad, better than being ruled by Israel. That was a choice facing them. Because I'll tell you right now, and listen to what I'm about to say, he had an army of 8,000, and that's before the casualties. This army held what you and I today would call Judea, Hebron, Yerushalayim area, up to the Dead Sea, Sodom, that whole part. The northern half was held by the Iraqi army, which was bigger. By the end of the 1948-49 war, the Iraqi side goes, we're out of here. We're leaving. At that point, he had the 8,000 men to cover the whole Shomron, as we call it today. He knew very well, he can't hold on to that against Israel. So from that moment, at any time, Israel could have busted him. I want you to understand that. If you look at during Ben-Gurion's time, and then Golda Meir, all the other times, Israel, had it wanted to, from 1948 to 67, could have easily taken on the West Bank at any moment. As a matter of fact, it was the United States and the British that kept saying, don't do it. You get it? Don't do it. And Ben-Gurion listened to them. But I'm just saying, from the military perspective, even later they doubled, they tripled, they quadrupled the army. It's a tiny. And they didn't have the tanks and the airplanes that Israel had and so forth. So, Lamaisa, when 1967 came, Israel just walked all over them. You follow what I'm saying? Especially they did a pincer movement, from the bottom to the top. So the Jordanians basically had an indefensible position. That's what I'm trying to get across. I don't think most of the people who follow these things realize these basic facts. That's why I'm sharing with you tonight. So as big as the psychological gap between Abdullah and the Palestinians, there was a big one. But on the other hand, let's put it this way. He was willing to accept the Jewish state, bargaining with it for the best deal he could get for the Palestinian diaspora, even if it meant that many could not return home. And if they did, it wouldn't be in the same way. So from then on, based on what I just said, and realizing the facts on the ground that I just described, Abdullah was a pragmatist. He's like, look, we're not going to conquer Israel. You understand? If a war starts again, we're doomed. If you want to be very technical, I'll take you technical just for a second. Israel fought Jordan in the first round and the second round, and then it was over. They fought the Egyptians and Syrians in the third round and the fourth round. You had ceasefires, you know what I mean? And then the ceasefires were broken and they kept fighting. How did Israel take over the Negev, for example, things like this, in like the third and fourth round against Egypt? But Jordan was very smart. Already in July, after the second round, Jordan said, we're not fighting anymore. And that way the United Nations and the others would prevent Israel from attacking them, even though they could have. You see? So once the war was over, and they split Yerushalayim, as we all remember, and that sort of thing, so the King Abdullah said, I guess, okay, as far as I'm concerned, this is how the thing turned out. It wasn't exactly like I promised Golda Meir. I understand what, the stuff happened, but basically the plan is still the same. I'll rule the Palestine part, and Israel will rule the Jewish part. And we'll have two states, and let's make a deal. He said, give me a little bit of land back here and there. Let me have a road to go to Gaza. They bargained, like I say. But the basic idea is, he said, as far as I'm concerned, Israel is here to stay. Of course, if things turn different, we'll revisit it. But that's always the way it is. But in his time, not. And so, understand what I'm about to say very well. As a result of the war in 48, 49, I don't know, 500,000, 750,000 Palestinians ran away. Where'd they go to? Some went to Jordan, some went to Syria, some to this place, that place. A lot of them went to the West Bank. You get what I'm saying? No, it was not far away from where they had lived originally. And then the war was over. And here's Abdullah negotiating with Israel. And he's saying, let's make a deal. Whatever the deal is going to be, those guys are not going back to Israel. Does that make sense? It's not going to be that Jaffa is going to be an Arab city of 90,000 again. It's not happening. The Arabs are not all going back to Tiberia, to Tzfat, and so on and so forth. Whatever the deal you're talking about. So they're going to have to reconcile themselves with losing their homes from the old state of Israel and settling somewhere in Jordan. This made the Palestinians so angry. In other words, they're giving up, as we would say today, on the right of return. That's why they shot him. You understand? That's why they shot him. Now, as I told you before, Abdullah, who was an aristocrat and educated, he said, these guys are all stupid. Go for what you got now, and let's see how the future turns out. If Israel is a strong country, then at least we get half a loaf. If Israel is not a strong country, get Zachaneksa, That's what it is. But don't go with all this utter rejectionism now. They don't want to hear this. So it was too much of a clash. And it's also true, by the way, he did not hate the Jews. That's not who he was. I don't know how it would have worked out if there would have been a peace between Israel and Jordan in 1951 as they planned, because there was tremendous hatred on both sides, but who knows? Throughout all of this, keep in mind that the Jordanian army was tiny, much smaller than Israel. As I said before, they could have taken over the West Bank any time you want. Partly because it was good from Israel's point of view. Let me put it this way. Why did Ben Gurion and these other guys negotiate with him? This way is no Palestinian state. You get it? At least under him. It killed the idea of the Palestinian state, which it did. You didn't hear about any of that for another 15 years. So I'm dealing here with hard, realpolitik, the real world. And that's how Israel was thinking. Meanwhile, the Mufti, he set up his own government in Gaza, and from now on you have two states supposed to represent the Palestinians. The West Bank is part of Jordan, and the king of Jordan, Abdullah, said, I'm the ruler of the Palestinians. And here was the Mufti under Egypt. He said, no, we're the real Palestinians. The other guys are liars, and they're dominators and things like this. So the Mufti and his team are the ones who kept alive the idea of Palestine. Yasser Arafat comes from that. You understand? They were enraged that Abdullah was smothering it, and they were even more enraged that Abdullah was going to sign a full peace with Israel, and it would give him control of the Gaza Strip. Because the deal was, like Arafat wanted, that Abdullah would rule the whole business, all the Arab parts, including the Gaza Strip, which means he'll come in and kill the Mufti, which was okay with Israel, you see? And so they assassinated him for a whole list of these crimes from their point of view. That's what happened. The assassination did not result in the Mufti taking over the West Bank. So Jordan chugged along under King Hussein, who came next, for 50 years, up to what we're talking about in this series tonight. King Hussein was the king from 1952 to 1999. That's almost 50 years, okay? He would be Israel's neighbor on its longest and most exposed frontier. You see? Now, I'll tell you again, as far as we're concerned, as far as Israel is concerned, he's better than the others. You know, if you're going to have an Arab ruler next door to you, it's better him than anyone else. What should be Nasser? You get it? It should be Arafat, somebody like that, Khomeini. Of all the alternatives, that's the best you're going to get. Not that he was great. Now, from the Jordanian point of view, Israel was the most dangerous neighbor next door, who was always looking for a chance to swallow the West Bank, which is true. Okay? And the reason Israel didn't do it is because of America and England. Relations were poisoned by two factors: the inability of the Jordanian government to restrain the Mistananim, whose depredations include all kinds of atrocities. So this was the era when the Arabs were always crossing over the border, you know, the old Israeli border, and killing and this and that and the other, killing, stealing, and so on and so forth, and sometimes in horrible ways, you know, chopping up the bodies and so forth. And the Jordanians, with their army, couldn't really stop it. So in other words, all Israel could do, I don't know if this was right or wrong, what they call Pula Tagmul, which is revenge attacks. You understand? And so just look at this. You can just Google. Look at all these things. You can go on this. What is this? A attacked B attacked A. A attacked B attacked A. Go to the next one. A attacked. This is all taking you all through their 50s, right? You see what I'm saying? These guys came in and shot up a bunch of kids. Israel went in, blew up a village, and killed a bunch of kids. Let's go to the next one. You see what I'm saying? It went on and on and on. I think this is the last one, Lulav, because it took place on Sukkot. So it's a poisoned atmosphere, get it? Now, Israel would say to King Hussein, why don't you stop this? He couldn't stop it. All these Palestinians living there, they want to go in and hit Israel. The border wasn't sealed, so you can do it. So what did Israel do? Usually, they did one of two things. Either they wiped out a village, great, that solves a lot, or they blew up a Jordanian army post or a police station. So how's that help? You're not going after the guys doing it, you're actually weakening the government. Is that what you want to do? Do you want to weaken King Hussein so that the other guys should take over? Israel was in a bad spot. This tit for tat increased hatred, and the Israeli raids weakened the regime, which could only help the Mufti-type radicals. Remember, all through the time, I'm talking about there was no PLO, but this will generate it. Slowly, both sides realized this. And after the Sinai campaign, the frontier pretty much quieted down. That's why the Lulav is the last one on this list, which is right after the Sinai campaign. Right then, the Jordanian government got more serious. There's a whole bunch of reasons for this, and I don't expect anybody to remember, you know, in Ramat Rachel, a Jordanian soldier just shot a bunch of people, you know, went crazy, and then this happened and that happened. But the bottom line is they started to crack down. But by the way, the Jordanians were always afraid that Israel was going to make a surprise attack, which is why you have the famous story of the Belzer Rebbe, because the Belzer Rav lived in Tel Aviv. We were there the last time when we had this meeting, but sometimes in Yerushalayim. And sometime in the 50s, I forget when, he said he's going to go to Yerushalayim. If you're a Belzer, you make a caravan of cars, get it? So notice now you have 100 Jeeps and taxis and this and the other, going on that old road. There was only one road from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. The Jordanians like seriously freaked out. They said this is a surprise attack. And they called the United Nations. The United Nations had called Ben Gurion and all the rest. They said, it's not a surprise attack, it's the Belzer Rebbe. But it shows you how big the tensions were. You get it, the tensions. Now, at this time, in the late 50s, after the thing, the throne of King Hussein was severely threatened by the Nasser and all these other types. And he was very close to being overthrown. Ben Gurion allowed the British to fly over Israeli territory to rescue Hussein. You get it? In order to get there, they had to fly over Israel. Israel could have said no. But they wanted him to survive. You see, Nasser, who was frustrated by the failure of the plot, vowed to overthrow the Jordanian monarchy and added to the United Arab Republic that he was creating at that time. So Nasser had Egypt and Syria. You know the map. And then add Jordan to it, and Israel like mamish surrounded. Okay? He called King Hussein a dwarf, a whore, this, that, and the other. And Nasser's agents assassinated the prime minister of Jordan. Hussein plotted revenge. The best revenge he could do. I think it was in that context that he started secret talks with Israel. You get it? Now, there you see, there's, what's his name, Chaim Herzog, who was the military governor in Jerusalem at that time. Now here we're talking the old Israel. Mandelbaum Gate, right? Here's the Jewish part, here's the Arab part, in the middle of no man's land. In the no man's land, that's where the two sides meet all during these years for local things. I'll give you an example. Suppose the Jewish kid kicked a football, a soccer ball over into the Arab part. Is it a war? Is it not a war? Do you get it back? The two generals got to meet. The United Nations have to be there. They have to decide what happened. Was it a bomb? Was it a football? All those things happened. You get it? What if a little kid ran away from home and crossed onto the other side? These things happened. You see? So there was that kind of basic contact. And in that context, Herzog got a message from King Hussein, which is, he says, I need help, which was secret, of course, and unknown. Here's an Israeli description of this. Let's go to the next one. You can read the Hebrew. But basically, Jordan was an obstacle to trying to make a united Arab Republic, Eilat Arvi Mukheret, and there were attempts to assassinate the heads of Jordan in order to instill confusion, which would prepare the ground for taking over Jordan by Nasser. After the Jordanian prime minister was assassinated, this guy Hizmet Jali, Hussein, the king of Jordan, planned a revenge attack on Syria, because the Syrians' attack killed his prime minister. For this reason, in 1960, he needed there should be quiet on the border with Israel, because he's going to move the army from the West Bank up to attack Syria. It didn't happen, but this was the plan. Okay? Now, wait a minute. How are you going to make it that Israel doesn't attack? On 14 September 1960, a special message reached General Herzog, who was the head of the military intelligence, with the idea that Jordan is going to strip its forces on the Israeli border, and they want to know, if they do that, will Israel use this opportunity to attack Jordan, because there'll be no soldiers blocking them. And Ben Gurion sent a message. He said, we will not attack. Actually, the existence of Jordan as an independent Arab state is in Israeli interest. Okay? And this is the first example of what I'm talking about. So long before they signed a treaty in the 1990s, which had a different character, there was this secret stuff going on based on the oldest idea in the world, which is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or at least he's not my enemy. But the enemy of my enemy is at least not my enemy. Okay? And indeed, this was the beginning. Pretty soon Hussein started going to London to a Jewish dentist, this is true, and there he would meet secretly with Yaakov Herzog, who was one of Ben Gurion's top advisors. He was a frum guy, by the way. And, they discussed all kinds of things off the record, but everything, of course, at that time got upended by the rise of the PLO and of El Fatah under Arafat. So in other words, the old fights between Abdullah and the Mufti are now revived between King Hussein and Arafat, to simplify. Okay? So the good old days were over for Israel. Now, the Palestinians wanted a greater Palestine, which included Israel and Jordan, right? And they know that. After all, why not? Shtei gadot le'Yarden. I don't know how you say it in Arabic, but that's what they hold also. Now, anything which destabilizes Israel and Jordan, and especially anything which gets them to fight each other, is a plus for Arafat, for the Palestinians. It took years for Israel to realize this. This is a matter of psychology, and things that make common sense, only in retrospect they make common sense. You don't see them at the time. And so there was a famous incident 1 year before the 67 war, Samu they call it, where some Israelis got killed by a bomb, and they sent in the Tzahal to attack a Palestinian town and a Jordanian military base in the Shtachim, in the West Bank, and they blew each other up. And wait a second. So in other words, it was a revenge attack. You killed our guys, they killed Jordanian soldiers. Lyndon Johnson, who was a friend of Israel, he said, "Why'd you do that?" No, America was smarter. He said, "Don't you stupid. What are you attacking him for? It was the Palestinian terrorists that did it. If you weaken Jordan, you're helping them." And he was 100% right. You see? Then, of course, in 1967, King Hussein repeated the mistake of Abdullah. He said, since everybody's going to attack because of the Arab Street, and mind you, I want you to understand, the guy was a Shalom. He intended to wipe out Israel because the Jordanians, army was planning to cut here, where it's 10 miles across and divide the country in half, and that would have been the end of Israel. He's not exotic. Nevertheless, as you all know, that's not what happened. Israel took over the West Bank finally, something they've been talking about for years. After 67, for the next 20 years, from 67 to 87, right, Hussein held constant secret talks trying to get it back, but he didn't. So if you remember, Israel had the Alon plan. This is what Israel wants even today. And now you got Bibi reelected. This is what they want, the Alon plan, which is you can have some Palestinian thing here, there, or some variation thereof, but we control the Jordan Valley. That way nobody can send you secret weapons. You understand? And this area is sparsely populated, so Israel can hold on to that. So we will allow, at the most, a Palestinian state of some sort inside of Israel, which is why they call it apartheid, because the South Africans used to have that with Botswana and all this stuff. Now, but Israel says our security depends on it. So, there are books on this. He said this, they said this, he said this, they said that. They never could agree, even though they met all the time. And like I say, he flew the plane himself there, and he knew Golda Meir's kitchen and all this other kind of stuff. And but he said, listen, I need East Jerusalem, I need everything back. And they said, no, what about this plan? What about that plan? I need everything back. You see, I can't face the world if I don't get everything back. So they couldn't agree. Mind you, he means the Har Bayis, including everything back. So, but King Hussein derived one big lesson from 67, no more war with Israel. I don't care what the Arab Street wants. And that's why, as we know, he stayed out of the Yom Kippur War, which saved Israel. Because, and I hope to do this on my trip, this guy is General Peled, Moshe Peled, who I told you last year is in the United States Tank Museum as one of the 5 greatest tank generals of all time, even though most people don't know this. And he had his division here, and the Syrians, as you know, wiped out the Jews up here, and they were about to go into the Galil, and he brought up, once he found that Jordan's not going to attack, he brought up his guys up here. It's a very famous scene. By the way, you can go see the whole thing if you go on YouTube, Chaim Sheka'ela. In Israel, they have a show, This Is Your Life. You understand? I think it's in English subtitles, maybe. And he said, no, we're going to take it back. But Moshe Dayan said, it's all over. We lost. He said, no, it's not over. And he chased them. He busted them, which is why this is just an interesting American history. Even though the Israelis held they lost the war, but the Americans knew that they won the war. And at that time, this was 73 and 74, the American army was leaving Vietnam. That was a low point. And the American commander-in-chief, General Creighton Abrams, who was a great general, he was a very great soldier, he said to the head of the American armor, he said, you go to Israel, find out what they did. And they brought this guy over, Pellet, to Kentucky, the tank corps thing. And he said, explain to us what you did. He says, I don't know how to explain it. When you're there, you see it. So he said, listen, let's have a drink. You tell me over it, and I'll write it up as notes. And then I'll organize it into doctrine. And this is how they beat Saddam Hussein. You see? They followed the playbook, and they wiped out Saddam Hussein without losing anybody. And if you go in this show, which you can see on the YouTube, the American generals all came to this Israeli, show. Of course, they're talking English, and they say, I guess he's the guy who saved the U.S. Army. Right? Now, it couldn't have happened if King Hussein would attack, you see. So, in other words, that was a major element for 15 years after the Yom Kippur War. So that's 73 to 87, I guess, right? So, 88. So, Hussein kept trying to retrieve the West Bank. And he would have done so, except that the Menachem Begin Likud won. If Rabin would have won the second time, then we discussed this. He would have gotten it back. I mean, I want you to think about it, those of you who visited Israel in the 70s and 80s, because it would have been Jordan already. Yeah, you wouldn't gone there. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know what Rabin and Peres would have done for the Har Bayis. So just think about that. Now, as we saw a few weeks ago, when the Labor Party came back in the 80s under Peres, there was a last attempt to cut a deal with Hussein, but it fell through. That was Shimon Peres and thing. Shimon Peres touted it as a lost opportunity, but it's baloney, because Hussein never gave up on East Jerusalem, the Har Bayis. As at Oslo, Peres' policy is to kick the can down the road, so the existential dynamics would have pressured Hussein to be hardlined on these issues. He couldn't, as an Arab, give up the Mosque of Omar, you see? So how would this ever work out? But at this time, Hussein reconciled himself to not recovering the West Bank. He said it's over. It was a reluctant, but a rational choice. Probably he realized that by this time in 87, 88, Palestinians were nationally conscious, and there could be no return to the old days of pre-67. Even then, he had to use artillery. After the Samu raid, there was a Palestinian uprising against King Hussein. He brought in cannon and blew up the towns. And that's how they suppressed it. I'm talking about it in the West Bank before the 67 war. You understand? So notice there were tensions even then. As in 1948 and 67, the Jordanian monarchs did not want to place themselves in front of an unstoppable and irresistible racing Arab street bus, which would have said, how can you give Israel the Har Bayis or something like that? And therefore, King Hussein said, I'm out of here, count me out. Now listen closely. For 30 years he maintained a Mossad relationship with Israel, sometimes closer, sometimes more distant. But after his bloody conflict in 67 to 70 with the PLO, the relationship was closer and stronger based on pure realpolitik and self-interest. In other words, both Jordan and Israel hate Arafat. He's a threat to both of them. The two intelligence systems, notice from the late 60s, the Mossad and the Jordanian Mossad and Mukhabarat, they were always sharing information. The two governments quietly shared the waters of the Jordan River. The Jordanians usually prevented territorial incursions into Israel, which means usually after 1970, when they crushed the PLO in Jordan and they ran away instead to Lebanon, the problem was not in the Jordan area, the Bikat HaYarden. The terrorism came from the Lebanon, you see? And that's why. Because by that time, King Hussein was like this, you're not playing me. That you should launch an attack, Israel should attack me, I should fight Israel, and you gain. Me and Israel are smarter now. And we're not gonna participate in that game. You see? The population in Jordan, by the 70s, certainly by the 80s, everybody knew that Hussein was secretly talking to the Israelis. But as long as he didn't make peace with them, as long as he insisted on the Har Bayis and everything else, he wasn't publicly attacked. Indeed, the contact-hungry PLO watched with fascination to see what concessions could be wrung from the Israelis. Here's a book by Abu Mazen, which I saw, and he's saying, we've been trying to negotiate with Israel since, day one, since the 70s. And we always wanted to see what we can get out of Israel, and we know he's secretly talking to Hussein, and so that at least we know from that what Israel's willing to give up. Of course, we're going to ask for more, but at least we can see from what he's talking to Hussein what Israel's willing to give up. So look what a crazy place the Middle East is. The people there, the population in Jordan, hated Israel and still do. But they did like the informal benefits, the economic. I think we know this. Israel, they send food across back and forth and things like that. Some of the food you eat in Israel come from Jordan. I believe you know that. And the Shemitah here especially. So quietly, there was like a de facto truce or something like that going on. By the time Yitzhak Rabin came in office, the Palestinians were representing themselves, and the Jordanians were representing themselves. If there were any concessions Israel was going to make, wise or unwise, prudent or imprudent, it was going to be to Arafat, not to Hussein. Well, if that's the case, stripped of the West Bank, the king of Jordan didn't have any intractable issues with Israel. No, then why not? If they're making a peace with Palestinians, why not make a peace with the Jordanians? I mean, what is preventing that? It's not like the Harabayas or the territory and all the rest of it. Israel wasn't asking for any territory from Jordan and vice versa. Hardly, a few miles here and there. So it's no surprise that as soon as it became public that Israel and the PLO were making peace in Oslo, that Arafat, Bechvodo V'yatzmo, was going to publicly sign a peace with Rabin. King Hussein said, Hutcher too, I can do it too. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If the Palestinians can now come out openly and make a peace with Israel, then why can't Jordan? In fact, there wasn't that much to negotiate. They've been talking secretly for 35 years. You see? Still, the cautious king, and he wouldn't have survived, wasn't cautious, asked the other Arab rulers, what do you think of it? Egypt said, go for it. And Syria said, you could talk to them, just don't sign anything. That shows you the different mentalities. You understand? Now, by the way, Syria was also negotiating with Rabin. I told you that last week or 2 weeks ago. Rabin's plan was to get back to Golan and everything, for a peace. In the end, though, it happened with a preliminary White House lawn ceremony, but it already gets boring. Here's a piece of the ceremony under Bill Clinton. But the fix was in, the fix was in.
Please be seated. Your Majesties, Prime Minister and Mrs. Rabin, distinguished guests, today we gather to bear witness to history. As this century draws to a close, a new era of peace opens before us in ancient lands as brave men choose reconciliation over conflict. Today, our faith is renewed as we write a new chapter in the march of hope over despair on these grounds and at this historic table. We remember the courage of Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin and the leadership of President Carter at Camp David 15 years ago. The efforts of President Bush to bring Israel and her neighbors together in Madrid 2 years ago. And that shining September day last year when Prime Minister Rabin and Chairman Arafat declared that their two peoples would fight no more. Today, in that same spirit, King Hussein and Prime Minister Rabin will sign the Washington Declaration. After generations of hostility, blood, and tears, the leaders of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the State of Israel will solemnly declare, with the world as their witness, that they have ended the state of belligerency between them. From this day forward, they pledge to settle their differences by peaceful means. countries will refrain from actions that may adversely affect the security of the other, and will thwart all those who would use terrorism to threaten either side. The Washington Declaration is the product of much hard work. Less than a year ago, Crown Prince Hassan of Jordan and Foreign Minister Peres of Israel met here publicly for the first time. Together with the wise counsel and persistent energy of the Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, Israel and Jordan have pursued peace, and we are all in their debt.
Prime Minister Hashemite, ladies and gentlemen. And so it is that on this day, at this house of the great American people, we have been able to take a historic step. The hope and pray will be to the benefit of our peoples within our entire region. Jordanians, Israelis, and others. This is the moment of a commitment and of a vision. Not all of what is possible is within the document we have just ratified. But a modest, determined beginning to bring to our region and our peoples the security from fear, which I must admit has prevailed over all the years of our lives. The uncertainty of every day as to how it might end. The suspicion, the bitterness, the lack of human contact. We are on our way now, truly, towards what is normal.
By the way, if you're King Hussein, every day is filled with fear. You don't know what's going to be for lunch. You might be for lunch. Now, it is true that fortunately geology and topography make it as a natural line between the two countries. That's a good thing. I don't know if you ever thought of it. It's the best I could come up with. Here's the Kinneret. This is the Jordan. A river is Givaldic, right? Because in other words, I'm on this side of the river, you're on that side of the river. So that's your best. I mean, the ocean will do, but it's the Middle East. So at least there's this side of the river and that side of the river. That's good. But what happens when you finish with the river? Well, you got the Dead Sea. All right, that's also good. There's a body of water. I'm on this side of the body of water. Now, here's the point. If you had a topographic map, it's a natural split down to here. You know what I mean? What's called the Arava. There's this side, the hills on this side, and this side of the hills over in the middle is like a wasted land valley. That's also a good border because we're over here, you're over here. I think you know what I'm talking about because whenever you go to Israel and you look at the Jordan side, you see the hills like far away. It's not like nearby, and that means there's like that. It's like a V. And for purposes of establishing borders between two countries, on dry land, that's as good as you're going to get, you see? And so it wasn't too hard to work out the borders, 99%. On the other hand, so the area south goes all the way, as we know, down to the Gulf of Eilat, the Gulf of Aqaba, And anyone who's been in Eilat knows, here's Eilat, and across the street is Aqaba, right? But you can see the two parts. And the place they signed the treaty a year later, let's go to the next one, is Wadi Arba. Here's Eilat and Aqaba, and right over here is where they signed the treaty, all the way at the bottom of Israel. You see? So again, it's out in the desert. This is my side, this is your side. It's not simply you put up a string, here's the Eruv. It wasn't like that. It's a natural formations. Now, mind you, Israel definitely made some concessions to the Jordanians. Let's take a look at this. Here are the basic principles of the treaty. The borders, as we said before, follow the Jordan and Yarmouk rivers. I'll talk about that in a second. The Dead Sea, the Emek Arava, that's what I was telling you about, the Emek, this depression, and the Gulf of Aqaba, and it's separated over here without prejudice, sister. Diplomatic relations, and so on and so forth, and, seaports, air travel, and so forth. Each country promised respect sovereignty and territory of its side, and not to enter without permission, and to cooperate against terrorism. That's a biggie. No. Jordan does do that. That's why, sometimes the Jordanians cuss out Israel fairly often, all the rest of it. Israel does not really respond, because the bottom line is, are they working behind the scenes against the mutual terrorism? You see? It's supporting border attacks, smuggling, hostile attacks, not cooperating with any terrorist organization against the other. And they have kept that. Now, they kept it for their own reasons, but they kept it. Let's go to the next one. Yerushalayim, Article 9, the Palestinian peace. The special role of Jordan in the Muslim holy places in Jerusalem, and high priority to the king's historic role in these shrines, negotiations, permanent status. This is already a shtick. Really, the king of Jordan had nothing to do with the Har Bayis. But I told you at the very beginning of our talk tonight, the guy who started the Hashemites was Sharif Hussein. He was the keeper of Mecca. That was his chashivas. And he goes back to Muhammad. He was kicked out unceremoniously by the Saudi Arabians. You understand? So Abdullah, if he's not going to be the protector and keeper of Mecca, then for second best, they'll be the Har Bayis. You understand? Now, when he ruled this territory from 48 to 67, they were in charge of the Har Bayis. They care a lot. Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres didn't care that much. And so what they said is, we're not giving you the Har Bayis, but we recognize you have a special role there. Which is why, if you ever read the papers, you'll see that every once in a while comes trouble in the Har Bayis, correct? Comes trouble in Har Bayis, sometimes called by Muslims, sometimes called by Jews. It's a fact. And Jordan is particularly angry, and they say this, that, and the other, because they say we have a say in what goes on there under the treaty. And then water. This is the most important part. Israel giving Jordan 50 million cubic meters of water each year, and for Jordan, 75% of water from Yarmouk River. Both countries could develop other water resources, but here's the key point. 50 million from Israel's water, and Jordan can get 75% of the Yarmouk River, and so forth. Herein is something very complicated. Let's go to the next one. Most people don't know this. The Kinneret, you know about. And everybody knows that what I'm doing over here, the Jordan River goes out of the Kinneret. I think this crowd, everybody knows that, right? But that's not the only river. There's two rivers that come together. Do you see that? It's the Kinneret. Here's the Kinneret, here's the Jordan River, and here's another river coming from Arab land called the Yarmouk that pours into the Jordan. You see? It's not what you think. It's not simply all the water comes from the Kinneret, and from the Kinneret goes to the Jordan, and down into the Dead Sea unless you grab it along the way. There's another river called the Yarmouk River, which is not in Israel, it's in Jordan and in Syria. So that's why, but on the other hand, Israel said like this, we're what they call a riparian state. We have a little piece of it, and so we want part of that, but since you as you see, most of it is in Arab lands, so you can keep 3/4 of it. And this is the deal they cut. Now, mind you, Israel every year gives Jordan, or sells them, I don't know, more than what's required under the treaty. Because the population of Jordan is part of Vayishritzu, Vayirbu, Vayatzim, Mod, Mod. But Timolei Arzasam, they have a big population explosion, and people got to drink. The alternative is have revolution. You understand? But these are very tricky points over here. So Israel gives them this and this much. I might say that, you see over here, Degania? I think some people have been there. That's at the very bottom of the Kinneret, and they have what they call the Gedania Secher, which is like a little dam. And that's how Israel's been taking the water for the Kinneret forever, since the 1920s. A guy, Rutenberg, built a certain dam system there. And that's how it goes. When you see the Jordan River, that's after Israel has siphoned up a certain part of it for Israel drinking purposes. And in the treaties, all kind of discussions about what's going to happen. Golda Meir met Hussein in that water plant. You understand? Up there. So it's a complicated subject. But nevertheless, the two sides want to make peace, so they worked it out. And they have worked it out in the 30 years ever since. And therefore, about a year later, there was a public ceremony just north of Eilat. You understand? Clinton went there and all the rest of it. On the border, that's going to be the formal signing between Israel and Jordan, just like Egypt, a complete and total peace treaty. You'll see each side gets a little bracha over there. Take a look. Here's the Israeli guy, here's the Arab guy. The Arab rabbi. So he gets a bracha. 1 minute. That's their thing. And now the rabbi gets a bracha. Shar Yashav Kohen from Haifa.
Behold, he that giveth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Lord shall preserve thee from confusion. He shall preserve thy soul. Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. Amen.
גבירותיי ורבותיי, ברשות הדיבור לראש ממשלת ישראל ושר הביטחון שלה, מר יצחק רבין.
السيد إسحاق رابين رئيس وزراء ووزير دفاع دولة إسرائيل يتحدث إليه. Mr. Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of the State of Israel and Minister of Defense, will now address us.
חג שמח. חג שמח לעם בישראל. חג שמח לעם בירדן. מי ייתן ביום זה יביא סוף פסוק למלחמות, אלימות, פעולות איבה, ויותר לא נדע עוד מלחמה. ברשותכם, אעבור לשפה האנגלית. Your Majesty,
King Hussein I, President Clinton, President Weizmann, the foreign ministers of our countries, distinguished guests from all over the world, the peoples of Jordan and Israel. From this podium, I look around and I see the Arabah. Along the horizon, from the Jordanian side and the Israeli side, I see only a desert. There is almost no life here. There is no water, no well, and not a spring, only minefields. Such were the relations between Israel and Jordan during the last 47 years. A desert. No one green leaf, no trees, not even a single flower. There comes a time when there is a need to be strong and to make courageous decisions, to overcome the minefields, the drought, the barrenness between our two peoples. We have known many days of sorrow. You have known many days of grief. But bereavement unites us, as does bravery. And we honor those who sacrifice their lives. We both must draw on the springs of our great spiritual resources to forgive the anguish we caused to each other, to clear the minefields that divided us for so many years, and to supplant it with fields of plenty.
And you can see the whole thing yourself if you really cared online. The idea was that now you see that Israel signed its second genuine, full-blown peace treaty with a neighboring state. That's the last time it happened so far. As with the Egyptian Treaty of Begin and Sadat, and today is the anniversary, November 19th, of Sadat's visit to Israel, the treaty was a triumph of mind over heart. Mind over heart. The Arabs were and are not happy about having signed such a treaty, especially in the absence of a PLO state. It seems that by signing the treaty, they have facilitated another 30 years of Israeli occupation. And there is truth to that, okay? Because Israel has had peace with this, they haven't had to close with, the PLO. They have their reasons. Truth to tell, the Arabs still hope Israel will be wiped out somehow, someday. If that happens, then the treaties of 79 and 94 in the Arab mind will simply be blips on the radar screen. In other words, the Egyptians and Jordanians came to the treaties with very different expectations than the Israelis. To Rabin and company, utopia, to the Israelis, utopia is a Middle Eastern peace and prosperity, with Israel at the constructive center of it all. In other words, Israel is the Switzerland of a new Europe. To the Arabs, utopia is something else. Utopia is the Middle East without Israel, okay? And as you know, the Arab maps, reflect that, as you see. For this reason, the treaties to this day are hated by the broad public in Egypt and Jordan. Newspaper columnists, commentators, Islamic clergymen are always calling for canceling the treaties. You read about it all the time. Especially in Jordan, this happens whenever there's any kind of uprising on the Har Bayis, as we know. This is something that the Mossad watches very closely. They have to. It has an effect on Israeli policy. In other words, Israel sometimes says, let's forget this or that, or take away those monitors that they had and things like this, because we don't want to overthrow the treaty with Jordan or with Egypt, which, by the way, is something that's hated by the Israeli right. That's exactly who Ben Gvir and Smotrich are. They say the fact that we're afraid of the Arabs, it hurts Israel. You see, and we say we have to be strong on them. This is a machlokes of policy. On the other hand, the utility of the treaty has prevented this cancellation from happening. Both Jordan and Egypt get great practical benefits from the treaty. Some of this came home to the Jordanian population in the last 20 years or so, when they alone were spared the turmoil of their neighbors in Iraq and Syria. I think you know this. Iraq hit potzets, right? and Syria also, and everybody's killing each other by the millions, and neighbors are killing neighbors, and the only place where there's no war in the Arab country is Jordan. Lebanon, mitpotetzet, Syria, mitpotetzet, Iraq, mitpotetzet, Egypt is also, it's a dictatorship holding one there, like this. The only country where you don't see this so far is Jordan. So the people in Jordan aren't totally stupid. They say, listen, I hate to admit it, like I say, mind over heart. I hate to have a treaty with Israel, but you know something? I like the fact that I can walk on the street and come home every day and go to the store, live a normal life. That's important to me, you see? Now, it's too late to explain it all now, so let's save this for the next lecture. For the lecture on December 31 when we do Israel and the Arab states, and let's call it a good night.